welcome to a special edition of my Nagging Thoughts. I'm here with author Jen Grice. She wrote the book, You Can Survive Divorce. And today we're going to be discussing the wrong ways that women give headship. This is part 2 in a series. To hear all the episodes in the series, please take a look at the links in the description below. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment on all of these videos to let us know what your thoughts are. My heart really goes out to you because you were much more ingrained in church culture, and there was a lot of external pressure on you to be codependent. So I had this advantage that, there was a diversity of ideas and theologies that I could challenge within my mind. And yet, when my marriage was in its peak crisis, I lost my bearings. I said this in one of my videos. I felt like that plastic bag that was blowing in the wind in circles. I cannot imagine women that are trained from childhood to think like this, and then when their marriage is in crisis, they have counselors, pastors, elders telling them, affirming that same logic, and there's no rescue. There's no compassion. How was that like for you? Kind of being trapped in this, environment where there wasn't any of that to counterbalance it.
Well, I'll first say that I hear from a lot of women who've experienced that, who they grew up in the church, this is what they grew up with, and then they married, a Christian and all those things. For me, I wasn't a Christian until my early 20s, and so, but I didn't have a lot of good marriage, people to look up to as far as how a marriage should look. So I was kind of just listening to whatever Christian, at that point I was a Christian when I got married, any Christian advice that I could find. So when I was in marriage counseling with my husband and, he was messing up, that's what we were calling, kind of tripping and falling and having affairs. It wasn't ever put as like, these are major sins. It was kind of like, oops, he did it again, and we have to give him grace. But on the reverse side, it was always, but Jen, you could do this better, and this would help him not to fall into sin. And Jen, you could do this. And it really came down to, I was blamed. I felt very blamed in counseling that I was the one that was causing his affairs, that I was the reasons why he would need to have an affair, and my imperfections weren't keeping him satisfied enough. But after my divorce, I really learned that here's the thing about healthy relationships, and I think this is maybe where you had an advantage over Christians who aren't learning psychology, which is very much Christian, is that in a healthy relationship, a husband who is dissatisfied will go to his wife and say, I'm dissatisfied about this. What can we do to work on our marriage? On the flip side, a narcissist will say, I'm dissatisfied in his own head. I'm going to take a sledgehammer to my marriage and go cheat. Mm-hmm. That's what you need to make the distinction, is that the marriage is not healthy. It's the man's choice for how he deals with his discontentment, his, whatever going on with him that he feels he needs to handle in a healthy way. If he's not handling in a healthy way, that's never the wife's fault. We have to stop putting the blame for the choice for him to, go out and cheat or abuse or whatever he chooses. He could make a healthy choice and handle it in a healthy way and get the help to work on the issue. But unfortunately, that's where women come to me after the destruction has already happened. The sledgehammer has already been, put down on the marriage. She's crushed emotionally because she's expected to be a doormat like myself and just take the blame for all the affairs. And he's like, well, it's your fault, so I'm going to go marry the mistress.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're not going to be faithful to the mistress either. And just listening to that, what verse is popping out in my brain is this Ecclesiastes 8:11. Like, when a sentence is not carried out immediately against a crime, the human heart is encouraged to do evil. So it's like that's what's happening when you just instantly try to treat unfaithfulness with grace. That's what goes on just between, a husband and wife, and you want to be loving, you want to make it work, and like that's where you're generally going to go immediately. And then when you have other people outside saying, well, if you would just put out more, if you would just care more, if you would just submit more, if you would just cook more, if you would just clean more, or whatever they're saying, then he wouldn't behave this way. That is just like taking that Ecclesiastes 8:11 and putting it on steroids. Like, why wouldn't this man just be intoxicated with that sin and just go full throttle? These are theological abuses that they do originate outside. So it's not just that women are hysterical and they're doing this to themselves because, they're crazy. It is originating within the culture of Christianity, and that's what I'd like to see change. But once these toxic messages are out there, we do beat ourselves up with it. So these things can be so utterly crushing, even if just somebody blows a whisper of it, because it's already being sledgehammered within your own heart and your own mind. But you, I think, have experienced far more than just a whisper of these things. What are some of the theological abuses that you've encountered in your marriage?
Shortly after the first affair, early on in our marriage, first physical affair, we had a pastor who showed us the books, Every Man's Battle. And he basically said that my husband was fighting a battle that I knew nothing about, and that my job as a wife was to help him with that battle and help him to win that battle. And the battle was that he was like it was normal for him to be addicted to look at women. The pastor even said it's kind of like somebody who really likes donuts and who's overweight and has to stay out of a donut shop so that they don't overeat on donuts, where he was saying that my husband was addicted to women and that he needed to stay away from women so that he didn't fall back into sin. And the Every Man's Battle books there's also a book for women. And I was obviously told to read that about forgiveness and how men need sex and men look at women and they only lust after women. And it really started to steer my marriage. And it became, I think that's where the codependency came in, that's where it became, me leading the marriage and him kind of like, okay, yep, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it led to abuse, because it became, emotional and some sexual abuse, because the books were kind of giving it like permission to say that this is what a man needs. There was very little mention that I remember, this is like, 20 years ago now, of what a woman needs. It was all based on men's biology, what the Bible said about it, how men were created by God to lust after women, and that it was a wife's job to make sure that he didn't fall into sin. And I think that goes back to all the stuff that we're talking about, and that's where it's just, that's a huge billboard sign rather than a whisper of this is how it should happen in a marriage.
I still haven't gotten around to checking out those books. I think, more people, more respectable people and more voices are openly condemning the Everyman series. I think they've even, the authors have even said something about it at this point.
The authors of the book didn't know about narcissism, I think, when they wrote the books, 25 years ago or so. And now the main author of some of the books, he's more of an expert in narcissism, and he says that narcissists will use these books to abuse. So, and that's what happened in my case.
Yeah, so I do appreciate you bringing those up, because people do need, even though they're old, like people do need to know that is a very unhealthy source of marriage advice. And I just can't imagine being handed that in the midst of a marriage crisis. Like, you're already just like a burn victim, just so like sensitive and fragile. And then to have somebody put this on top of you and be like, well, yes, you're in need, but that's not that important. What's really important is his libido. And if you can just satisfy that, you'll be fine. And this is one of the other things that I wanted to just bring up is that, you know, I was aware that there are plenty of women that do shut down and they stonewall their husbands, and they stop having sex with them sometimes for years at a time. And my heart goes out to men that are in marriages like that, because that's also abusive. That is not a loving partnership, you know, when there's this, you know, like unilateral disconnect, right? So, and, you know, I can't speak categorically of everybody that's facing that dynamic, because, you know, sometimes it might be the natural consequence of, you know, abuse, or it could be a female narcissist or what have you. But in any case, when I was married, I was aware that it's bad to cut a man off from sex. So I didn't read the Everyman series, but I had that idea still, that doctrine in my mind, that if you don't satisfy a man sexually, he will stray. So I did my best to continue to satisfy, right? Even though I wasn't getting my needs met in the bedroom. And I say that not from like a physical standpoint, because that's not the point. The point is that there is a complete emotional disconnect when it becomes about satisfying the sexual drive. There's that one fleshness, that sharing of hearts, that becoming one. It's not happening. What are your thoughts on that aspect of?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two things to consider, and I think you kind of mentioned them. As one, that, you know, when a female is in an abusive marriage, which those are the people that I counsel and coach, and is that they didn't feel loved and cared about enough. When your husband, you know, calls you the B word, or, you know, says some mean things about you, especially in front of your children, or is manipulating you, and then, you know, 2 hours later is like, hey, you know, you have to do your duty. I'm sorry, but most people won't want to. You don't feel loved at that point. You feel like you're just being used. And I know in my own marriage, the books, I don't know if it's the female book or if it's both the male and the female books of the Everyman Battle, but they mention that men need sex every 48 hours. And when you're being told that you have to, you know, perform every 48 hours, it doesn't feel like love either. It feels like it's a duty, like You're saying, that you just have to get it over with. And I'll say in my own marriage, same thing. I did my duty, like, but, you know, was it really a happy marriage, or was it a great thing? Probably a lot of times not, because it was just part of, you know, like washing the dishes. Was that fun? No, but I did it, you know, that kind of thing. It wasn't enjoyable. And so I think it's important that we note that, yes, those things happen where a man is deprived, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If a man is deprived, then he needs to communicate with his wife in a healthy way to say, this is how I feel. This is what I'm seeing going on. When men come to me and ask, Jen, you know, I'm in this reverse situation, what should I do? You assert your boundaries, just like she should if she's in that circumstance, to say, this isn't working, and unless we work on our marriage together, equally yoked, pulling the cart equally, that I'm gonna have to assert some boundaries and seek divorce if you're not gonna pull your weight. And I think it goes both ways. For me, like I said earlier, that's what I've learned after divorce, is that if one person is, whether it's the male or the female, lagging behind and not doing, and I don't mean saying doing their duty like having sex, but I mean doing their part to be emotionally healthy, then you have to seek divorce. That's the only option.
I agree, because yeah, you have to respect where people are at, and if they don't have an independent desire to change, or if they're just giving you lip service, that, you know, because that was one of the most, like, I shouldn't say most, the most damaging thing is the deception. The fact that somebody that I love and trusted and went out of my way to try to respect, no matter how they behaved, I try to give that unconditional respect because of the influence of things like love and respect. To have somebody like that utterly betray me and exploit me for not just, you know, sex, everything, but the fact that he was content to take, you know, all those things, even the most intimate things from me, and have them, you know, be meaningless things that, you know, he's happy to trade with, you know, everybody else. I mean, it's traumatizing.
Well, as you were saying that, I was thinking, you know, that's one of the reasons why I've made the distinction early on in my ministry that adultery is abuse, because you are putting your spouse in great risk and your children to STDs and other things. And the emotional aspect of it is abuse as well, with the gaslighting and the deception and, you know, all the things. So I on my ministry and on my website, I talk about that adultery is just another form of abuse. And so I have women who come to me and say, well, my husband just cheated on me, he's not an abuser. And I have to say, I think you need to rethink that a little bit, because adultery is abuse.
It absolutely is. It's so exploitive and just so thoroughly exploitive. When there is abuse in a marriage, and you're in a heavy complementarian theology, there is a tendency to drown the head in so much grace that there's no accountability or consequence for his behavior, and you're starving the one that's underneath their weight, being crushed underneath their weight. You're starving them of all grace because they have to be perfect. You're not allowed to be entitled to love or respect, you know, until you're perfect. And it's like the perfect trap, because you're never going to be perfect. Like, that's what I love, is that God is able to love me even if I am everything bad, even if I am a sinner. Like, if God is forgiving and compassionate towards adultery and abuse and all these horrible things in a position of authority that is supposed to be held to a higher level of accountability, like, certainly he has compassion for those that are being crushed underneath the weight of it. And that was not something that I heard being voiced. I want to thank Jen Grice for her time. We had such a great conversation. I've edited it into segments to make it more easily digestible. So I hope you'll join us again next week, where we continue the conversation on the wrong ways to give headship. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next week. God bless.